Sorry, I'm a little intoxicated, but I couldn't sleep, so I was like, well, fuck it. Now I'll go ahead. I haven't looked at Mr. Ballin in a while, so I was like, oh, look at some. I think this is new. I think I downloaded this recently. Pretty sure I did. Cause I haven't downloaded anything from YouTube in a few days, or at least 2 days. Anyway, Mr. Ballin, here we go.
Today, I'm going to share 3 progressively more unbelievable stories, and at the end of each of them, I'm going to show you the photo that is famously associated with that story. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please offer to refill the like button's Keurig coffee machine water tank, but instead of using water, use vinegar. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss.
It's funny he says that because I just did that with my Keurig coffee maker, but I was doing it to clean it out, like put some vinegar and water in there. It ran hot water through it to clean it up.
On the evening of March 25th, 2017, a 25-year-old farmer named Akbar Solibiro was harvesting palm fruit
I wasn't even going to try to pronounce that
near
last
his
name.
tiny village in Indonesia. Now, the way Akbar would do this is he would use this long curved pole and he would prod at the bright red fruit in the tree, knocking it to the ground, and then he would gather it up, put it in his cart, and wheel it back home to be sold for palm oil. Now, on this night, Akbar was actually working later than usual because his wife and kids were out of town for a couple of days visiting family, and so there was no real reason to head back home because the house was empty. But Akbar was actually just fine with that because there was tons of ripe fruit, and so staying late would be quite profitable. But after a while, when the sun had finally set and it was getting difficult to actually even see the fruit in the tree, Akbar knew he really needed to leave soon because this area at night was actually not safe. So Akbar gathered up the remainder of his fruit,
wild animals and
he put his pole in the cart as well, and he began quickly making his way back home. Later that evening, one of Akbar's neighbors was asleep in their bed inside of their home when they woke up suddenly to the sound of something out in the jungle, not far from where Akbar had been harvesting palm fruit. And so this neighbor, when they sat up, they couldn't really tell what the sound was. It almost sounded like a stifled scream or maybe some animal that was fighting with another animal.
And it was,
but as the neighbor sat there straining their ears to try to hear it again,
it's a tiger. I don't know.
All they heard was
the tigers in Indonesia, I don't think.
And so the neighbor decided that the sound they heard must have been a cat or maybe a monkey, and whatever it was, it couldn't have been a big deal. And so this neighbor went back to sleep. The following evening, so 24 hours later, another one of Akbar's neighbors walked outside of their home to begin the walk over to the jungle to harvest palm fruit. And when they went outside, normally around this time, Akbar would be coming outside as well, because these two often went to the grove together. But, this neighbor is looking and Akbar's not outside, and he looks up at Akbar's house and it's dark and quiet. And so this neighbor's thinking to themselves, where is Akbar? I know he worked late last night.
Mind your business.
And come to think of it, I haven't seen him
Akbar
all day.
dead.
And now, of course, I'm not seeing him as well. And so this neighbor, feeling concerned about Akbar, walked over and knocked on his door, but nobody answered. And so really starting to think that something could be wrong with Akbar, this neighbor went to Akbar's uncle's house. And when Akbar's uncle came to the door, this neighbor explained what was going on.
Damn, they all lived in the same street.
And so the uncle and this neighbor would go back over to Akbar's home, and they would actually try the door. It was locked. They looked inside the windows, and it looked like no one was in there. And they also noticed that where Akbar typically kept his cart that he would transport his fruit in, it wasn't there either, which made them think, Akbar must still be out somewhere with this cart, because this cart is very important.
Animal calm slipping.
So ultimately, the uncle, after seeing the state of his nephew's home, he agreed with this neighbor that, something was wrong here. And if they wanted to find Akbar, they really needed to get together a search party right now and go looking for him. So the uncle contacted the leaders of the village, and they in turn rounded up all the able-bodied men in the village, and they all got together with headlamps and flashlights and machetes and knives, and then all together they began walking away from the village into the jungle in the direction of this palm grove, which was the place that Akbar had been last. And so this big group of men, they get inside the jungle and they begin walking along this path, which was the most likely path that Akbar would have taken to go to the palm grove and also to return from the palm grove. And as they're walking, you know, the sun is starting to set, it's getting dark, and the animals in the jungle, they're all making noises and kind of yelling at this group.
They've been out there all day.
And this group, they're shining their light around looking for any sign of Akbar, but there wasn't any. They were calling his name out, there was no response. And then at some point, as they got closer to the palm grove, they noticed there were a couple of bright red fruits, palm fruits, that had clearly been recently harvested that were scattered on the trail. And so the group began to fan out in this area, thinking that, oh my goodness, Akbar must be somewhere nearby. You know, maybe there was some sort of accident and he's fallen somewhere, or just something's happened to him, but he's got to be in this area. And so the group began fanning out off the trail, kind of hacking their way through all the underbrush. And then suddenly, one of the men, after he hacked through a particularly dense stretch of the jungle, he looked down and saw something and began to scream, and he raised his machete and began running forward. As far as we can tell, this is what happened to Akbar. The previous night, after Akbar had decided, you know, it wasn't safe to be in the jungle at night,
someone was eating him.
And so he gathered up all of his things and he began walking along that path where the search party would find all that fruit scattered on the trail. And so he's walking along this path, and he thinks he's alone, he thinks he's okay, but in reality, he wasn't. He was being watched and followed very closely from something up in the trees. And so as Akbar moved along, this thing was kind of trailing him and seeing what he was going to do.
Python?
And then at some point, this thing up in the trees began moving its way down.
The way he's moving his hands like a python.
It was a 23-foot-long reticulated python.
Yep, because he's in the trees and he was doing this. And I know pythons will be up in the trees sometimes, and they will literally just fall out of a tree on top of their prey to try to knock them out, then wrap around them and constrict them. But yeah, this is why they say, hey, don't be out really at dusk or night, because a lot of predators start hunting at that time. Now, I think pythons would kind of really, snakes in general, I guess they kind of hunt whenever, but it's like when they just say if you live in an area where there's like a lot of wildlife, especially like pumas and stuff like that, like don't be out at dusk or at night. You know, because you might get attacked, especially with children. They usually try to attack like small children, because animals like to attack easy targets. So they attack, oh, it's a small child, I'll attack that, because they do that in the wild. They attack like the small children of the animals, you know, because they're easier to catch. They have to keep hunting because there's not enough meat on them for them, but you know, it's something rather than not catching something at all.
It was a massive snake, and this snake came down and launched an attack on Akbar, grabbing the back of his neck with its powerful jaws. And as soon as the snake clamped down on Akbar's neck, he let out a stifled scream, which was the scream that had woken up that other neighbor who sat up in bed wondering what that was. That was Akbar screaming out. But that was the only sound Akbar could make, because immediately the snake wrapped itself all around Akbar and squeezed him tight. And after crushing Akbar, breaking almost every bone in his body, the snake relaxed and then slithered off of Akbar. So Akbar fell to the ground and was either dead or very close to death. And at this point, the snake opened up its jaws and positioned itself right in front of Akbar's head, and then it began kind of slithering itself forward, consuming Akbar head first. And the way pythons do this is they don't really chew on their victim.
They swallow,
instead, they kind of put their mouth over the top of whatever they're going to consume, and they kind of undulate and walk their bodies forward, driving the victim deeper and deeper into their body until they are completely consumed. And so the next night, when one of the members of the search party had gone off the trail and began hacking away and then saw something and charged after it with his machete,
but his bones
what he was seeing was the python, who very clearly had a person inside of its stomach. You could see the outline
This is
of
a real
the
photo
person.
of it.
So this search party member
I might
ran
have
forward,
seen this.
hacked the snake, opened it up, and there was Akbar, fully dressed and deceased, inside of the snake.
Why'd he blur this? Or maybe he tried to upload it and he couldn't, and it was getting flagged, so he just blurred it out.
On the night of February 19th,
I might have seen that
2022,
video.
a 41-year-old woman named Paula Ruiz was working the reception desk at a 4-star hotel in southern Mexico. It had been a long Saturday night with lots of tourists checking in and lots of confused tourists asking for directions or clarifications about things in the area. But it was finally nearing 11 p.m., which was the end of Paula's shift, and also things had calmed down near the reception desk. There wasn't much going on. And so Paula took a moment and grabbed her phone and checked it. And she saw there was a text message from her 19-year-old son saying he would be picking her up after work on his motorbike. And then just a couple of minutes later, Miguel, her son, actually walked in the front door of the hotel. He waved to his mom and said, hey, I parked my motorbike just down the street. Whenever you're ready, we can leave. And so Paula, she was very happy to see her son. She walked over, she gave him a kiss and a hug, and then she began gathering her things. Paula loved the fact that her son was totally comfortable driving around town with his mom on the back of his motorcycle. Other teenagers might think that was awkward, but not Miguel. But Paula knew her son absolutely loved his motorbike and basically was always looking for an excuse to ride it. And so very likely that was why he was so eager to give his mom a ride home. And so finally, after Paula had gathered up her things and said goodbye to her coworkers, she and her son walked out the front doors of the hotel.
Why you waiting for her?
Down the
I
road
thought he
and
went
around the corner
back to the
where
bike.
Miguel always
She
parked
come
his
out there,
bike
he be
whenever
gone.
picked his mom up from work. However, when they turned the corner and looked at the spot where Miguel said he had parked, his bike wasn't there.
Oh.
Now, at first, Paula asked Miguel, are you sure you parked it here? Maybe did you park it farther down the road? But Miguel said, no, this is where I always park. I definitely parked it right here. And so Miguel became convinced that someone must have stolen his bike. That was the only explanation that made sense. But Miguel still had the keys to his motorcycle, which meant whoever had stolen it had likely hotwired it. And since that takes quite a bit of time to pull off components of the bike and kind of fiddle around with the wires to make it start, Miguel was thinking that, okay, maybe they're still in the area trying to hotwire it. Let's go look for them and get the bike back. Now, the city in southern Mexico where Paula and Miguel lived was called San Cristobal de las Casas, and it was a totally beautiful place surrounded by all these hills, but it was also a very dangerous place, full of lots of street crime and violence and gangs that used the area as a hotspot for drug trafficking. And so this is not really a good place to be walking around at night, let alone trying to chase down some bike thief. But Paula and Miguel, they knew this. They lived there. They understood the risks. And Paula especially, she knew that Miguel was going to go looking for this bike because he loved that bike. And so Paula didn't hesitate and said, okay, Miguel, let's go looking. And she figured at a minimum, she could take a video or a picture of the thief if they found them with the bike, and then they could give that to police, and then maybe they could track the person down if Miguel and Paula couldn't get the bike back that night. And so Paula and Miguel began running down these side streets looking all over the place for Miguel's bike. And you got a picture of some narrow alleyways with barely any lighting. I mean, this is a sketchy area. And so they're running around, and then finally they turn a corner, and Miguel sees up ahead his distinctive yellow motorbike. And he sees some stranger is pushing it along. Clearly this person is pushing it away.
Oh, don't tell me this dude gonna pull a gun.
And so Miguel and Paula begin charging down the road, and Miguel actually gets in front of this guy and stops him.
Just hit him.
I would have just hit him. Screaming at the guy to give him his bike back. And then Paula, she joins her son, and she starts screaming at him as well and taking videos. And
fuck that. I would have, if I was behind him, I'd have ran out like right in the back of his head. I would have hit him so hard, I probably would have broke my hand. Or kicked him like square in his back. And unless I was wrong, but I ain't gonna find out I'm wrong until after I knock this motherfucker out. Ain't no way. Like I'm gonna get in front of him and just start yelling. This dude pull out a knife, a gun, and especially if I don't have nothing.
Pictures, and then as this is happening, another man on a motorbike came flying up behind Paula and Miguel. And as they did, Paula and Miguel heard the sound of the engine, and they turned around, and all Paula saw was this young man holding a gun, aiming it at her son, Miguel, right at his chest. And so her motherly instincts kicked in, and she leapt in front of her son, and then, not knowing what else to do, she raised her phone and took a picture. And then seconds later, there was a loud bang, and then suddenly this guy who had been trying to steal Miguel's bike gave it up. He dropped the bike, he took off running down the road, and the gunman, he too turned his bike around and sped off down the road, leaving Miguel and Paula in the alleyway. Except Paula was on the ground because a second after she took that photo, the gunman had shot her in the chest. Paula would be taken to the hospital, but she would die the following morning, orphaning Miguel and his 3 siblings. However, the photo that Paula took of her killer seconds before he killed her was such a high-quality photo showing his face that just 2 days after her murder, police were able to use that photo to find the killer as well as his accomplice, and they were both arrested.
I'm actually surprised. I actually found him. Damn.
If you didn't catch my live storytelling event last month on the official Mr. Ballin Discord server, then you kind of missed out. Not only were the stories awesome, at least according to me, but we also temporarily broke Discord because of how many people were trying to watch the event at once. But don't worry, you can be a part of our next live storytelling event on Discord if you just join the Mr. Ballin Discord server, which is completely free. All you have to do is click the link in the description of this video or click the link in any of my social media bios. Also, the Mr. Ballin Discord server is not just a place for live events. It's also a place where I make all of our biggest special announcements, and this summer we have a couple of huge announcements. So if you want to hear those announcements, you gotta get on the Mr. Ballin Discord server. Either click the link in any of my social media bios or click the link in this video's description below. Okay? Back to the stories. On the morning of February 25th, 2015, in a little house in the city of Cape Town in South Africa, a 17-year-old girl named Misha Solomon was packing up her homework in between bites of her breakfast. And as she did this, her mother, Lavana, walked into the kitchen with a big smile on her face, and she was holding up this beautiful red flowing dress. And immediately Misha knew what it was. Her mom had been making this dress by hand over the past couple of days. It was for a big school dance that was coming up, and she saw that it was now done. And so Misha, she put down her breakfast and her homework, and she rushed over to her mom, and she admired this gorgeous dress and thanked her mom for all the hard work and said it's absolutely perfect. And then from somewhere behind Misha, her father, who was still sitting at the table, kind of grunted out, "Hey, isn't that dress a little bit revealing?" And Misha and her mom...
I was thinking that, but I didn't think he was going to say that.
Misha's dad just loved his daughter and was very, very protective of her. And so basically anything she wore...
Shouldn't she wait till she's like 48 before she started dating?
So Misha, after rolling her eyes, walked over to her dad. She gave him a big hug and a kiss. And she said, "Dad, don't worry about it. It's just fine." And so after that, Misha went back to her breakfast, she finished eating, she packed up her stuff, and then she gave her mom and her dad another hug and a kiss and said goodbye. And then
he just trying to just pull out our heartstrings with these hugs and kisses.
As Misha's aunt drove her to school, like she did almost every single morning, Misha began to notice her aunt was acting kind of strange and constantly looking behind her and looking in her rearview mirror. And finally, Misha said to her aunt, "What's going on?
You
what
see
are you
that?
looking at back there?" And Misha's aunt would say, "I know this sounds crazy, but I'm pretty sure there's a white car that's following me. And in fact, over the past couple of days, I've seen what I think is this same white car following us anytime I'm driving you to school." And so Misha just turned around in her seat and looked out the back window, and she saw there were dozens of white cars on the road, so it was pretty difficult to tell which one her aunt was talking about. But as she's looking, none of the cars seemed suspicious. And so Misha turned back around and told her aunt, "I think you're just being paranoid. Nobody's following us. There's no reason to follow us." A few minutes later, Misha's aunt pulled up alongside the front of the school, and Misha said goodbye to her aunt. She thanked her, she hopped outside, and she rushed into the school. And then Misha made her way up to the hallway where her first class was, and as she was walking down the hallway, her best friend, Cassidy Nurse, was walking up the hallway in her direction. And so right away, Misha sees Cassidy and she waves and smiles and begins walking towards her. But Cassidy gave Misha this kind of weird, lukewarm smile and then quickly looked away from Misha. And then Cassidy turned and bolted into the nearest classroom. And so Misha just came to a stop and just looked at the doorway
Oh, don't tell
where
me
her
somebody
best friend
behind
has
her.
disappeared. And she starts thinking to herself, what's going on? Why did she
But she
do
would have
that? It
said
was so
something
cold.
if somebody's behind
And
her.
then Misha began to think about the fact that actually, over the past couple of days, Cassidy had been acting really strange. It was like she was trying to avoid Misha, but Misha had no idea why. It wasn't like they were fighting. Normally, Misha and Cassidy were totally inseparable. They had met earlier that school year, and even though they were actually kind of far apart in age, Cassidy was in 8th grade and Misha was in 12th grade, it was like it didn't matter. It was like right away when they met each other, they had this special bond. They just had to be around each other all the time. They shared everything with each other. And certainly anytime they saw each other in the hallway, they would stop to chat or even go into a nearby bathroom and do each other's hair and makeup and share any gossip they had recently heard. So for Cassidy to act like this was just totally uncharacteristic, and it really upset Misha. But just then, the bell rang in the school, so Misha knew at this point she was now late for her class, and so she had to forget about whatever was going on with Cassidy, and Misha just hustled down the hallway and went into her classroom. And so Misha, she takes her seat at her desk, she puts her stuff down, and she's getting ready to listen to the teacher.
The teacher said, "What the fuck you doing in my class?"
The principal comes in without even knocking, and without even saying anything to Misha's teacher, the principal walks right up to Misha and says, "I need you to come with me." And right away, Misha's classmates, all who saw this, they begin oohing and awing as if Misha is in huge trouble. But Misha's thinking to herself, I didn't do anything. Like, I have no idea what this is about. And so she kind of smiled like it was no big deal. She picked up her stuff and she followed the principal out into the hallway. But as Misha followed the principal down the hallway towards the principal's office,
some dude with her
Misha's
aunt?
smile faded and she began to wonder, what is this about? What's going on? And then finally, they got to the principal's office. The principal opened up the door. Misha went in first, and the principal trailed behind her and shut the door behind them. When Misha looked into the principal's office, she saw there were already 2 people inside who she didn't recognize. It was 2 women who were very serious looking, who were sitting on the side of the room. And as soon as Misha walked in, the 2 women, without introducing themselves, just told Misha to come over and take a seat next to them. And Misha, instead of doing that, just paused and looked at the women and said, "What's going on?" And at this, the 2 women kind of looked at each other, and then one of the women piped up and said, "Misha, we're here because the police sent us. And they sent us because of a photo that you and your very close friend Cassidy took." But before Misha could ask any questions like, what photo are you talking about?
They said this was
really,
South
what's
Africa.
going on here?
My
These 2
head, I
women
was like,
would
it was in
explain
Colombia
the
or
whole
something.
situation to Misha. And basically what they did is they told her this long, very convoluted story that involved Misha, it involved Cassidy, it involved this photo. And by the end of this story, this explainer story, Misha had taken a seat and put her hand over her mouth in utter disbelief. And then when the women were done explaining everything, Misha had a million questions, but it was like she was so overwhelmed with what she was just told that she just continued to sit there with her hand over her mouth, totally silent. And then finally, Misha did break the silence by saying, "Can I please just call my parents?" And at this, the social workers said, "No, you can't. And in fact, the police are already at your parents' house. They're talking to your parents right now.
Her parents,
and so
did they
you can't
kidnap
talk to
her?
them, and you can't even go home. In fact, you have to come with us for tonight." And then the 2 women got up and they made their way out of the principal's office. And they
I
said,
wonder if
"Come
her
on, Misha,
parents
you have to come
kidnapped
with
her
us."
and
so
she's been
Misha
living
stood
with
up and she's
people
totally
she thinks they're her
flabbergasted.
parents
She
for
really is
years.
like, how is this real life? And the principal at this point walked over and gave Misha a hug. And it was like suddenly the floodgates opened and Misha just began sobbing hysterically. And as she did, the social workers just stood there waiting patiently. And then as soon as it seemed like Misha was done crying, they said, "Come on, you really need to come with us."
Damn.
And so Misha, she
No
left behind
compassion.
the principal, and she followed the 2 women out of the school out to one of their cars. And once they got in the car, the 2 women explained to Misha that they were going to take her to a safe house for the night. But before they went to the safe house, they would need to make a quick pit stop at a local medical clinic. And so Misha, who at this point is not even asking questions, just said, "Okay." And so the women, they drove to the medical clinic. They were inside for just a matter of minutes. When they came back out again, they drove the rest of the way to the safe house. And when they got to the safe house, it just looked like a normal house on the outside, but on the inside, when the two women were leading Misha through and showing her where everything was, the kitchen, the bathroom, her bedroom, all Misha saw was all these other kids who were staying there who were orphaned and abandoned. And it started to give Misha a panic attack. And she asked the women again, can I please call my parents? And they said, no, you really can't. But one of the two social workers could tell that Misha, she's having a breakdown. This is the worst day of her life, very likely. And so one of the two women actually offered to Misha to come home with her and stay at her house instead of the safe house. And Misha agreed. And so that social worker and Misha, they would leave together, they would get into that woman's car, and they would drive to her house. And then the social worker told Misha that unfortunately now it was just a waiting game. They needed to wait for the police to get back in touch with them with more information. That night, as Misha lay in this woman's guest bedroom, looking up at the ceiling, wondering how the heck this had become her life, she began to think about the photo that her and Cassidy had took that had kind of started this whole horrible thing. And so Misha began to think about the day they took this picture, and all she remembered was that she and Cassidy were just kind of goofing around and smiling and making funny faces and just taking photos as they went. She certainly didn't think that one of those pictures they took would totally change her life. The following morning, when Misha woke up, the social worker brought her to their office, the social worker's office.
I wonder if he just naturally can tell stories like this to build like suspense, or did he take classes to do this? Because I've taken like writing class and stuff. I was like, how to build suspense and stuff like that. I could be writing like a script, like script writing and stuff like that. I've done that, or just a creative storytelling and stuff like that. But the way he did, I wonder if it's just a natural thing. Cause I know the guy just was a Marine. Oh, not Marine. He's a Navy SEAL. Like, I wonder if he, I'm sure he writes this stuff. So, either he write it or somebody else write it for him. But, I wonder if he took classes to do this, to be able to talk like this, to build. Cause I'm like, what the fuck is the photo? Like, I'm just thinking about something, like, what is in the photo? Like, he keeps like talking about it, and that's the key evidence that's gonna reveal everything. So you're like, what? I mean, I guess it's not that difficult. Like I said, I've done it before, but like I said, I was in that classroom where teacher was talking me through it, but yeah, I'm curious.
And there they met with the other woman who had first met Misha in the principal's office, and the three of them just sat in the office, not talking much, eating chicken wings and other snacks, just literally waiting for police to call them. And finally, they would call. And when they did, one of the social workers answered the phone, and as she listened to what she was being told, she began to frown, and by the time she hung up, she was crying. The news from the police was the news Misha had been afraid of ever since sitting in the principal's office the day before and hearing this whole crazy story about her and Cassidy and this photo. The special pit stop that Misha and the social workers made at the medical clinic the day before on the way to the safe house was so that Misha could get a DNA test. And now the police were calling back with the results of the test. And what the results showed was Misha Solomon was not actually Misha Solomon. Her real name was Zephany Nurse. 17 years earlier, Zephany Nurse had been stolen out of her crib at the hospital in Cape Town, and despite a massive manhunt for her, she was never found. And so this was a huge, famous case in Cape Town, and most people assumed it would never be solved. But Misha's DNA had done just that. It proved that Misha's parents, who had loved her and raised her since she was a baby, were not actually her parents. Her mother, Lavana, was actually her kidnapper, and now she was under arrest. But even though this revelation was incredibly shocking and upsetting for Misha, it was not nearly as shocking as learning the identity of her real biological parents. The social workers took Misha from their office to the police station, where they told Misha her real biological parents were waiting to meet her. And so once they went inside the police station, Misha gripped onto the social worker's arm tightly. She was incredibly nervous, and she was led down a hallway to a door that was shut. And then finally, when Misha was ready, she pushed the door open, and her real parents, who were sitting right in front of her, they stood up and they ran towards her crying. But Misha just stood there, stunned and silent, staring at them. Because these people, they were not strangers to her. She knew them extremely well. They were the parents of her best friend in the world, Cassidy Nurse. Which meant Misha, aka Zephany Nurse, was Cassidy's sister. Months earlier, when Misha and Cassidy first met each other, the reason they hit it off so quickly, and the reason they had similar senses of humor and liked the same things and looked so dramatically similar is because they were literally sisters. They just didn't know it. And then one day they took a series of selfie photos of themselves, and Cassidy, she would go home and show one of those photos to her parents and say, hey, look, my best friend, Misha Solomon, look how similar we look. And when Cassidy's parents looked at Misha Solomon, they instinctively knew, that is our daughter. That is Zephany Nurse.
Yeah, they do.
And so they would bring this photo to the police, and the police would
begin
to investigate. And during this investigation, they began trailing Misha. So when Misha's aunt told Misha that she thought a white car was following her, she wasn't just being paranoid. Those were investigators following Misha around, trying to get a feel for her schedule, because they needed to approach her when she was alone in order to get a DNA sample. They were worried if they contacted Misha and tipped off what they were doing, she would tell her parents, who were actually her kidnappers, and then potentially they might take Misha and run away. So they couldn't risk that. They had to basically follow her around and wait for an opening to get this DNA test done. And so this was also the reason why Cassidy was acting so strangely towards Misha in the few days before the truth was revealed. It's because Cassidy knew about this investigation, and the police told her, you can't tip Misha off. She will tell her parents, her kidnappers.
Well, then why is she acting weird? I mean, I guess she's in 8th grade.
Felt awkward and kind of just hid from Misha for a couple of days. The woman that Misha had grown up with and called her mom for her whole life, LaVonna Solomon, was ultimately convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 10 years in prison. There has never been any evidence to suggest that LaVonna's husband, so Misha's dad for her whole life, actually knew that the baby had been kidnapped, because 17 years earlier, LaVonna had been pregnant with their child. But it's believed she miscarried, and LaVonna did not share that with her husband. Instead, she told her husband that she had gone into labor while he was at work and delivered their child, and so that's how they had this baby, Zephany, when in reality, after LaVonna had miscarried, she had at some point dressed up like a nurse, gone into the hospital, and stolen Zephany. For her part, Zephany, aka Misha, stayed in touch with both sets of parents, the fake ones and her biological ones. And she would say that, she still loves the parents who kidnapped her because they raised her and they treated her well. And in fact, Zephany would actually wear that beautiful flowing red dress that LaVonna had stitched for her to her high school dance well after the news came out about who LaVonna was. Misha also decided that she would just keep the name Misha because that was what she was used to, instead of going back to her baby name, Zephany.
Yeah, they do look a lot alike.
On a cold and snowy day in January of 1994, a land surveyor for the North Carolina Department of Transportation to the hard plastic case that on the podcast. Again, it's called...
This is podcast. Damn, that last one was crazy. I mean, I've heard of stories like that before, where people were kidnapped as children. Or some they were kidnapped, when they were like 4, 5, 6 years old, even maybe a little bit older, and then raised by this person. But this person, this is all they knew. They were kidnapped as a newborn and raised by this person. And then to find out that a person that is your best friend is actually your sister. And then the people who raised you kidnapped you because she miscarried, and I guess she didn't have the heart to tell her husband that she miscarried. So she just dressed up as a nurse and stole a kid. And I ain't gonna lie, me, as she would have gotten older, I'm like, this kid don't look like you. It don't look like me. It doesn't look like either one of our grandparents or our parents, I guess it would be her grandparents with their parents. I'm like, I'd have been like, I'd have started questioning, like, is this my kid? Like, is this your kid? Like, why this kid don't look like anybody? It don't look, because I could see, when people lie about a kid, like if a woman has a kid and she cheated on her husband or whatever, and she has a kid, and if the kid, is not, it's not a white woman kid, come out, black or brown skinned or something, it's like, if it was like, oh, you look at the kid, and as that kid gets older, they might question things, but they just keep it to themselves because they don't want to make things awkward, like you questioning whether it's your kid or not, because by questioning it, you're saying that you think this person cheated on you, and that's going to piss them off. But you looking at this kid, because you can't really tell right away. I know my brother, when he had his he has 2 daughters, and when they were born, he's like, oh, they look so much like him, or that people say they look, and then I was like, no, people can't see, because I was like, I bet, because my mom told me, people saying they look like him or they look like her. Now I will say, my older brother looks more like my mom than he does our dad. Like, I look more like my dad. My oldest brother looks more like my dad. My middle brother, or like my older brother, he looks more like my mom. Because we look, he still resembles my father, but he looks more like my mom than, me and my oldest brother. And people are like, oh, she looks like his kids. Oh, they look like you. And then saying they look like my mom or their grandmother. But then I was like, hey, but I bet my brother's girlfriend, I bet her family was saying they look like her. And yeah, my mom was like, yeah, they were saying that. So I was like, yeah, people don't know. Like, it's especially when you dealing with a newborn, it's very hard to tell like which parent they look like. You got to start waiting till they get a little bit older. Now, at the age they are now, like my oldest niece is well, at least with my brother, is 5, and her sister is 3. My oldest niece, I would say, probably looks more like him. They resemble both, but I think she looks a little bit more like him. Now that could be because her skin is darker. Like, because her mom is light skinned, and my brother is like my complexion. He might be a shade lighter than me, just thinking about it, but he's around like my complexion. And his first daughter is lighter than him, but darker than her mom. Now his second daughter is the same complexion as her mom, so she's lighter than her sister. And she actually looks a little bit more like her mom than my brother, but it's different facial expressions. I noticed they do where they look alike, like my 2 nieces, like especially when they frown, I'm like this, they do that, they look very much alike, but they look alike, especially like here, like in this picture, because I think they both kind of have on our side of the family, like this part, the brow and eyes. Now I will say my niece, the younger one, has more of has more of her mother's side nose. Like her nose looks more like hers, and the older one has more of our side like nose. Kind of looks more like ours. It's a little bit thinner than ours, but it's like the way her nostrils stuff looks more like ours. But But yeah, you can't really tell. That's why like he probably was like, oh, well, I guess my kid, even though it looks probably they looking at her mom, that kid looks nothing like her as they got older. And then the older the kid gets, I'll be like, this kid looks nothing like me. But I guess at that point, I mean, really, you should be able to notice probably by the time the kid's like 3-4 years old. Like with us, like there was no way that my dad was gonna be like, yeah, them ain't my kids. Like, there's no way. We look too much like even some old pictures of my dad, especially like when I had my fro when it was really big, like when I was in high school. Well, my fro was fairly big like after high school too, but when I was in high school I used to pat it down, but when I combed it out it was much bigger. And I remember seeing some older pictures of my dad when he was like 18 and something when he was like his early 20s, and how much we looked alike, you know, especially when because he was my dad was much slimmer than I was. He was muscular, like he was very muscular, but he was much like slimmer than me. And especially like in teenage and 20s, like I was much, bigger. I did lose weight when I lost weight, like when I was in Florida, and I lost weight for the military. But then I usually end up gaining it right back. But I was always much stockier. Plus I was taller than my dad, and my shoulders were like, wider. Cause my dad was 5'10", and which is the height. Well, my older brother's like 5'10" and a half. My oldest brother, he's like 6'3", and I'm 6'2". And I was always like, cause my grandfather was like 6'5" on my dad's side, and my grandfather on my mom's side was 6'4". So, I mean, we always had we have some tall people there, but we also have some short people. Like my uncles, for the most part, were like, under 6 feet. One of my uncles, he's like, who was the oldest brother of my father's siblings. He was like, I think he's like 5 years older than my dad. Because I met him I've seen him before, but I hadn't seen him in decades. I think I saw him when I was like a little kid, and my dad told me, and I saw him at my dad's memorial, and he was a little bit taller than me. He was about the same height as my oldest brother. So, but yeah, you should be able to, I would think you'd be able to tell this kid looks nothing, nothing like us. Now, like I said, some people just like, I don't want to question it, whatever, because some people, they'll, pay for their kid all the way up until they're 18, then find out this kid is not theirs, And some of them don't regret it because I've been taking care of this kid all their life. This kid still sees me as their father or mother or whatever, and so you might be pissed off because you were lied to, but you're like, well, they're still my kid. I still love you. We just like, well, not my kid. And, I mean, they're an adult now, so it don't really fucking matter, but you're not gonna be like an asshole about it, But that's insane. Like you get that type of the fact that she was best friends with her sister. It's like, I had no idea. And even they saw it. That's the thing. They saw it. They took pictures of each other because they like, look how similar we look. And we're best friends. Like my best friend, he's much slimmer than me. But we two black guys who wear glasses. But we look nothing like he's about 4 or 5 shades darker than me. He's skinny. Well, I mean, he's not. We older now. He's not quite as skinny as he was when we were younger. But he's compared to me, he's skinny. I've always been kind of big. My weight fluctuates a lot. But people never oh, look like brothers. Because it's two black guys who wear glasses. You know, I'm like, we don't all look alike, you know. But looking at the pictures there, like, they look so much alike. I would have looked at them if I didn't know the situation. I'd have been like, are y'all related? Like, I would think they were like distant cousins or something, you know. Because I've met people like that where I've been friends with, and then we start talking, and we find out that we got relatives, you know. So we like kind of like distant cousins, you know. It happens, you know. You'd be like, whoa, this is my, like, you know, 6 cousins. So like you're so far apart that, I mean, you might as well not be related, but there is a connection there, you know. But that story, that must be crazy. I mean, she's in the 12th grade, so I'm guessing. I mean, I don't know how school works in South Africa, but I'm assuming the 12th grade is similar to America, where it's like she's about to graduate and go into, you know, I don't know how old, because I know in the United States, I mean, I graduated, people who graduated at 16, you know, but I was 18 when I graduated. And so I'm not sure, like, how old she was, like, if she was going to be an adult. I'm like, well, she's lived her whole life as a kid, and basically she's an adult. So, it's like, I mean, I guess she's still a minor because they took her and she couldn't be with her parents. So she's probably like still under the legal age of what a minor is. I don't know what that age is in South Africa. I'm just assuming it's somewhere around 17. That's probably like as far as like a minor and under. But I mean, some places you consider a minor, but you can still consent to sex with someone who is considered an adult. So you never. But anyway, hope you all enjoyed my reaction one. If you did, make sure to hit that thumbs up button down below. Make sure to subscribe if you're new here. Hit that bell if you want me to notify when I upload new videos. Comment down below. Share this video. I'll see y'all next time. Peace.